Okay, here's today's story. Picture this: 44-year-old nurse goes to police multiple times, reports that she's being harassed, stalked, emails, physically attacked on multiple occasions. Police can't figure out what's going on, and they eventually conclude that Cindy's doing it to herself, that she wants attention. But in 1989, she's actually found dead, and she's apparently been strangled and drugged, and her feet and hands are bound behind her back. So you think the stalker did this, but police conclude that it was either some sort of an accident or a suicide. There is strong evidence on either side, but what I can tell you is that there are very plausible suspects. I'd like to go over what happened in the case of Cindy James and see what you guys think. Did she do it, or did someone get away with murder? So the death of Cindy James was actually considered to be one of the most controversial deaths to happen in British Columbia.
They will be trying to find out if she was murdered or if she committed suicide. Cindy James was a nurse who lived in Richmond. Her body was found in a vacant lot there last year, 2 weeks after her family reported her missing.
When she was born, she was actually a Cynthia Elizabeth Hack, and she was born in 1944 in Oliver, Canada. Her mother was Tilly and her father was Otto, and she was one of 6 children. Now, we will talk about her brother Doug throughout the story. He does have a small part in it. And then we'll also talk about her sister Melanie at the very end. She actually has a blog, and she is working on a book called Who Killed My Sister, My Friend. At the time of her death on June 8th of 1989, Cindy was 44 years old. And when she passed away, she was in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is a suburb of Richmond. And the investigation was handled by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I actually found a little bit of information on a video that's linked down below from Bedtime Stories, which actually gave some history on Cindy's childhood. So it appears that maybe she didn't feel that close to her parents growing up. Like maybe there was a disconnect. It wasn't a very wholesome, loving family. There was mention that she had to do a lot of house cleaning and things like that. Now, when she was 18, her father was in the military, so they moved around a lot. And he had made a request to be stationed overseas. And in 1962, when Cindy was 18 years old, his request was approved to go to France. Now, Cindy wasn't about that she wanted to stay in Canada and go to school. So ultimately, that's what she decided to do, and she took up dorm housing in Vancouver. While in nursing school, it may seem she maintained a B+ average, and she was doing really well. Life was doing good for her. Her family was abroad, and things were okay for her. She was going to school and doing well in her life. Her brother Doug appears that he visited her often and was seeing her, so she was maintaining communication with the family. However, this was the first time that the family experienced Cindy to do something that was just a little odd. They received a letter from her, and in this letter, she was really upset. Her fiance had apparently suddenly committed suicide, and this devastated her, obviously. But her family was very concerned because they had never even heard of this fiance. And then when they checked in with Doug, her brother, because he actually had visited with her recently and often, he said he had never even heard this guy mentioned. He didn't know anything about this, not even a conversation. Definitely had never met him. So the family thought that was odd, but I didn't see that anywhere else in Melanie's blog. So I'm not sure how true that is or what actually happened in that situation. Now, in 1965, Cindy is now 21 years old, and she meets a man by the name of Roy Makepeace. Now, Roy is her tutor, but eventually they start to talk. The problem is that Roy was 39 years old and married. But the next year in 1966, Roy left his wife for the 21-year-old Cindy, and in December they were married. Now, Cindy's parents were not actually happy with this arrangement. Of course, there's this 39-year-old man, their 21-year-old daughter. He was supposed to be her tutor. He's married. They are, of course, concerned that he's taking advantage of her. Now, I'm not sure how this happened, but at some point in time, Cindy reads a letter to Roy, a letter that is supposed to be written by her mother, expressing all of these concerns that, he might be taking advantage of her, he's much older, all of these things that they were concerned about. But it turned out that her parents didn't write the letter. Cindy actually wrote the letter. So again, another kind of odd behavior that made people question her. According to Roy, he just wrote it off as her being dramatic, which is very possible. She was young, and maybe she wanted to tell him what they had said, but thought it'd be easier if it was written. Who knows what her young mind was thinking. Roy did mention how throughout their marriage, because their marriage did end after 14 years, and we're going to talk about it in a minute. So when Roy was asked about his marriage with Cindy, he explained that he was often very frustrated with her, that she was very dramatic. He was a psychiatrist and she was a nurse, but apparently her behavior didn't seem to mature with her growing up and aging. The way he explained it was like this dramatic behavior as a young teenager might have. And Cindy had reported to friends that Roy had gotten physical with her. Now, Roy admitted that he did get physical and that he, on 2 occasions, had actually slapped Cindy. He justified it by saying she was just being so ridiculously intolerant that that was the only thing he could think to do, but that it wasn't as bad as she had said it was. Neither one of them are with us any longer, so we'll just leave it at that. It wasn't good behavior. So let's move along to the timeline of how this all came to be. There are going to be a couple of people that are going to come into play. And there's going to be a couple of moments when I tell you a couple of things that your mind is going to be made up either way. Need you? Just keep rolling with me, okay? Because this one's a really tricky one. So we're going to start out 1966. She actually graduated from nursing school. She ends up doing preschool administration, working with children, and then working at a hospital with children, and specifically children that have behavioral and emotional issues. 1968 is when she marries Roy, and she's 22 years old. Roy at this time is now 40, and he is a psychiatrist. In July of 1982, 14 years later, the couple decides to separate, and Cindy moves into her own place. It's important to know that at the age of 39, this was the first time Cindy had ever lived alone. She went from her parents' house to a dorm to living with Roy. So 4 months later, on October 12th of 1982, Cindy phones police and lets them know that she's been receiving some alarming phone calls. She said that the person on the other end of the line is being obscene and making vague threats. The next day, on October 13th, she phones police again and lets them know that she's getting more phone calls and that it seems like somebody tried to come in through her back door. 2 days later, on October 15th, she reports that someone threw a rock through her window. And 4 days later, on October 19th, she calls the police to report that somebody has slashed her pillows. Now, this is where Officer Pat McBride enters the scene. He is the officer that was sent to her home to respond to this report. When he gets there, he ends up talking to her more. They seem to hit it off right out the gate. And so she's comfortable talking with him and explaining to him what's been going on. And Officer McBride is questioning her like, hey, are you sure there's no, like, you said you and your husband just split? And now all these weird things are happening. Is there any chance? At this time, this is when we understand that her and Roy get along, that their separation was amicable and they were still being friendly with each other. And then in fact, Roy was the one that encouraged her to phone the police about the pillow when she found it. He was told her, no, you need to call the cops right away. So she was very strong that she did not feel that Roy could in any way be doing this to her. So 2 days later, again, Cindy and Officer McBride got along really well. So he actually came back as a personal favor 2 days later and installed all new deadbolts onto her doors for her. And that's when he decides to start dropping by daily to check in on her. October 30th, a cutout note is found on Cindy's porch. Now these notes were this obviously like old school style where you cut letters out of a newspaper and glue them to put together a new threatening note. All of the notes that were left were done in this style. There's only so many photos of them, but they were all done in this way. They had some sort of a note to her and then some sort of a graphic image of a woman or a person, something happening to them in a sexual manner. By the end of October, Cindy and Officer McBride are actually dating and he ends up moving in with her. Kind of because they're dating, but kind of also mostly to keep an eye on her, to help out and see what's going on. Within a week or two, it's now the beginning of November, he's just moved in. He ends up finding Roy Makepeace in the alley behind Cindy's house. He's actually back there patrolling the area with a gun. He said that he was just looking around, he had some available time, and he just wanted to make sure Cindy was okay. But he didn't tell Cindy he was going to be there. So just a side note to add on that this was another thing that happened. Middle of November, there is another photo that is found on Cindy's windshield. And it actually has like a mutilated body. And it's a photo from a book called Malpractice. During that month, her phone lines are actually cut 5 times. December 1st, 1982. We're still in 1982. This is within 2 to 3 months of the initial report to police that someone's harassing her Officer McBride has moved in, and now on December 1st, she just asked him to move out. They are still dating. He still has a key. Everything's fine, but she's starting to she doesn't know what's going on, and she asked him to move out of her home. Now, I found this, and I couldn't find any further information. And it said, January of 1983, the phone company was able to install a tap, and they traced some of the calls that Cindy was receiving because these calls were just coming whenever. And apparently they were able to trace some of the calls to the Vancouver area, but nothing was specific. Because of course you're wondering, like, did they trace phones? Like, but this is like 80s. So how much they could do is it was a little different than what they can do now. January 4th. And pictures arrive in the mail. And McBride finds another note out on the front lawn. Again, same thing. There's like mangled, mutilated. They're just very threatening letters. Okay, so January 27th of 1983 is actually the first attack that Cindy suffers. Her friend Agnes was going to be coming over. And when she arrived, she sees that she knocks on the door and Cindy doesn't answer. She assumes maybe she's in the bath. She ends up eventually going around to the side for some reason, and she finds Cindy on the ground of the garage. She's unconscious, and she has a stocking around her neck. The one thing I can't seem to clarify, because the reports are different. Some people say that the stocking was wrapped very, very tightly around her neck, and then other people say that it was just loosely draped around her neck. And that's a very important distinguishing factor, whether or not. And I tried to find police reports. I tried to dig in. So just to be very clear that if you research this case, you're going to find that some people say that the stockings, because it's a continuous thing in each attack, that each time these stockings were just loosely around her neck, or they were actually tied around her neck in a very hard fashion. Anne ends up finding her. Cindy ends up going to the hospital. She doesn't have a lot of memory. She says that somebody knocked on her back door. She ended up getting knocked down, and that all she could really remember was the white sneakers from the person. I have also heard that it was two men and that she did recognize one of the men, but not the other. But that information didn't come out until later. So February of 1983, there's another investigator that's assigned to the case. It's Officer David Bauer-Smith. Now, he feels that Cindy is holding back something, but he also feels that her ex-husband, Roy Makepeace, is the one to blame. Now, she took 2 polygraphs. I heard they were inconclusive. I also heard she failed them. I also heard that she was under extreme stress and that she shouldn't have been giving a polygraph test at this time. But what police felt was more important is that they felt like she was holding something back. She wasn't telling them something. It's at this time that her family believes that she had been threatened, that whoever was stalking her and harassing her and attacking her had made a very clear threat that if she told police who it was, that her family would be harmed. So it's very questionable of what she was holding back. During this year, Cindy also made a couple of moves. There in the spring, she moved into a new home. And then in April, the phone calls started happening. And then at the end of April, she decided to move again. We're still in 1983, and in August, this is when she starts receiving letters that are actually coming to her work. She had been working there since 1975, but in August of 83 is the first time that letters arrived at her place of business. October 15th of 83 is when the first dead cat arrived on her lawn with a note that said, "You're next." The end of October, someone also destroyed her garden. Now, it was mentioned at a later time in a journal that Roy Makepeace, her ex-husband, had actually destroyed a garden of hers prior when they were married. During an argument, something had happened. And the only reason that was important is that when police asked her if there was any chance that Roy could have done that, and she was really clear, like, no, Roy would never destroy one of my gardens. So I thought that was interesting. November of 83, there is another note on the porch. There's another strangled cat that was left on her property. And then there was also a cat that had been hit by a car that was also left on her front porch. At this time, Officer McBride, they're still in contact. They're still talking and dating, and everything's between them. And he encourages her to hire a private investigator by the name of Ozzy Caban. This was after her phone lines were cut yet again. So she ends up hiring Oz. It is important to note that after this was over, Ozzy's final conclusion of Cindy was that he did feel she was evasive, that he believed her, but that he always felt like she was holding information back from him and that she would never give him the full story. So now she's hired Ozzy, and again, we have a couple of months of quietness over Christmas, and then January 30th of 1984, we have another attack. Now, Ozzy, trying to help keep Cindy safe, the private investigator, had given her a two-way radio and some sort of a panic button that she could trigger if she needed help. So on January 30th of 1984, Ozzy hears strange noises coming across the radio. He tries to reach her, she's not responding, and he decides to go to her home. When he gets there, he ends up looking through the window and he sees that Cindy is laying on the ground with a paring knife stuck in her hand. When he saw that, he thought she was dead. There was a knife and a note stuck into her hand and she's laying on the ground. She ends up being taken to the hospital and they do find puncture wounds in her arm. Cindy tells him when she does recover that she has absolutely remote memory and she has no idea what happened. After this, the next month in February of 84, Roy Makepeace was interviewed extensively for over 6 hours. He said he did not have any idea. I think this is when he started to mention, remember he's a psychiatrist, and I think this is about the time that he started to mention that she might have multiple personality disorder, which a lot of people just felt really strongly about as a psychiatrist to say that. There's a lot of theories around that. Like he would not have said that. If he had, he would never, he would have like had her so closely protecting her. Like there's a lot of strong opinions about him saying that. He also brought up the fact that maybe her work at the hospital with children could have somehow got her involved with a corrupt lifestyle like mafia or someone connected. March 29th, the next month, Cindy has to do her polygraph again, and she does pass this one. Now we're in the summer of 84, and it's important to know that everything with Cindy started to change. Everyone at work was noticing her behavior was different. She was starting to lose weight. She was starting to withdraw from everyone. June 18th of 1984. I'm a little confused on the exact details of this one, but Cindy ends up, somehow they get triggered that to Ozzy, to the radio. And when Ozzy arrives at her house, he ends up finding her back door is open. And when he goes inside, he finds that her dog Heidi was like strangled and was like tied up to the table and had been like severely beaten. So like to the point that the poor little dog was like, I'm sorry, this is like triggering for anyone. Like, yeah, I know this is like so sad, but like we deal with really sad stuff on this channel. But yeah, the animal's actually sitting in its own feces. Like it was just horrible. And to this day, they have no idea what happened to this dog to make it be so petrified, scared. The end of that month, another strangled cat is left on her front porch. On July 3rd of 1984, Cindy is going on a walk. Now, another inconsistency that I find on this case, I read all over the place that Cindy was like consistently going for walks at 3 o'clock in the morning, knowing that there's like a stalker out there. Then people thought that's crazy. I think that's absolutely crazy. I wouldn't go for a walk at 3 o'clock in the morning regardless, but especially knowing there's a stalker out there that's trying to harm me. But then I'm hearing when I'm rereading notes and stuff, I'm finding that her walks were more like at 8:30 at night. And so on this particular time, July 3rd, 1984, she actually let Ozzy know that she was going on a walk. So he knew, okay, I'm going on a walk. But then I don't know how this transpired. Apparently, at 8:30 at night, she let him know. And then 3 hours later, she knocked on a stranger's door and she collapsed to the ground. Apparently, there was a black stocking again around her neck. Some say loosely, some say tied tightly. She said she had no idea what happened, that she remembered walking down the road and that a man and a woman in a green van stopped her to ask for directions and that she has no idea what happened. Police did a toxicology report to see what could have happened because if she was drugged, and they didn't find anything in her system other than her own antidepressants that she was prescribed to be taking. So again, police were confused. What is going on? So now we're in August of 84. This is going on for about 2 years now. And Ozzy ends up recommending to Cindy that she should see a hypnotherapist. And she ends up seeing a hypnotist by the name of Hal Booker. In August, he was not able to get any information from her. However, in October for their second session, she tells him that she witnessed something. Like as she's starting to talk, she mentions something about maybe witnessing a double murder, but she has no further information on it. Now in October, Cindy and Ozzy actually go to the police and are telling them like, hey, what's going on? Can you guys help us? Like we still don't have any information. we're not getting calls at the exact moment, but they're going to start up again. And in fact, in December of 1984, the calls start again. And then Cindy decides to go back to the hypnotherapist in January. So now it's January of 1985. She ends up telling the hypnotist a story of Roy, her ex-husband, that in 1981, they were on a trip on a yacht and that he had killed and dismembered a couple that were on an island there. And so they're like, whoa, that's crazy. Like, but then they talked to her sister Melanie, who was on the trip, and she said, nothing like that happened. Like, nothing was weird on that trip. I didn't see anything. I didn't notice anything. Like, doesn't seem right to me. And police are not able to find any connection to a missing couple in the area. Things are quiet for a while, but on June 21st of 1985, Cindy was actually hospitalized for a possible suicide. It appeared that she might have overdosed on pills, and she was admitted into the Lionsgate facility in North Vancouver. She is eventually released. She's supposed to be released to her brother, but she does go home on her own. June and July, her phone lines are cut, but in July is when police actually do a week-long stakeout on her home, and they actually involve 14 strike force officers, but nothing happened in that time. They didn't see anything. They didn't find a thing. Nothing happened, and they had no clue. As a result of there being a tap still installed, in July of 85, though, Cindy called to report that she had received a phone call that was silent. And when police checked that recording, it turned out that Cindy had actually dialed her own number herself. I don't mean to laugh, but this is the point where I was telling my husband the story, and he's all, oh, she did it. I was like, no, I don't know. But maybe so, but don't give up on, don't give up yet. I know. Why did she dial her own number and then report it? So the obvious option is because she was doing it the whole time and just making this up. And then we're just wondering, did she have a mental concern, or did she just want attention? Or was it really happening and she was just getting so frustrated that she started to lose her mind and she started to do things to get their attention because she didn't want them to stop working on the case? There's a lot of possibilities. July 27th of 1985, Cindy reports that she received a bag full of rotten meat in a bag in the mail. August, there's a series of fires that take place at Cindy's, one of which included her having friends that were overstaying. August 3rd, the first fire was in the basement. There was a window that was open, but there was no sign of forced entry. August 6th was the second fire. The detective that was working on this case thought Cindy's doing this. They completely thought that Cindy was doing it. But again, the friends that were staying with her, they said, no way, she would never do that to put them at harm. And then on August 21st, we had the third fire. Again, there's an open window, but police noticed that nothing is disturbed around the windowsill. So the dust, the cobwebs, nothing's disturbed. She ends up receiving a check for $9,500 from insurance. And on December 1st, she moves to Vancouver, which is a suburb of Richmond. On December 11th of 1985, Cindy leaves on her lunch break and doesn't return. She's eventually found wandering a nearby university campus. She has no shoes, she has no coat, and she has no idea what happened. They do find that there again is a needle mark in her arm and a black stocking is around her neck, again loosely or tightly wrapped around her neck. This is also when things got awful for Cindy. The police department publicly announced that they did not believe her and that they were considering filing charges against her, and she was left with absolutely no choice but to agree to go to treatment or they were going to file charges against her. And ultimately, she just agreed to go to treatment. However, she did not follow the rules. She was told to go to actual therapy, and she decided to continue seeking treatment from an unlicensed therapist by the name of Connolly. This is important later to understand the type of therapy that she was receiving. April 15th of 1986. So now we're in 1986. There is another fire. It is determined that, again, it started inside of the home. I think this is actually the fire where the friends were staying. I was a little confused on which one. But again, it's another fire started inside of the home. No signs of forced entry. And now Cindy says that she is adamant. It's got to be Roy, her ex-husband. He's got to be doing this. But unbeknownst to her, Roy was actually in South Africa at the time this fire was started. So he personally could not have done it.
Cindy said she was depressed because no one believed she was being tormented by someone who wanted her dead. She told police she believed the tormentor was her ex-husband, Roy Makepeace. They encouraged her to phone him, confront him, and tape the conversation. This is an excerpt introduced at the inquest.
Are you denying it?
Oh, my God. I am certainly denying it. I always have denied it. I have absolutely nothing whatever to do with it.
Police found no evidence of Makepeace's involvement. He gave police a tape of a disturbing message left on his home answering machine.
She ends up speaking with a therapist, and this is when the 3 therapists that are speaking with her decide that, okay, something's not right, and they determine, they said that Cindy's doing it herself, and that the fact that she was seeing this unlicensed therapist and he believed her and was so adamant that she was being stalked and attacked, that they believed that what started as something that she could have got help for turned into a serious problem, and by him encouraging her made it worse, and that's why her behavior was so out of control, and that they felt that her behavior had escalated so bad that she would almost do anything so that everyone would believe her and think that Roy was harming her. That was their opinion on what happened. And according to this report, that Connolly, the unlicensed therapist, eventually agreed that maybe he might have been the cause of Cindy's behavior escalating, or she was really being stalked and not believed. July 15th of 1986, that is when Cindy did actually start therapy with a new therapist, and things were going really well for her. September that year of 1986, she bought a new home. And then in October, she decided, you know what, I'm going to change my last name too. She was getting a new start. At some point in time, she even repainted her car. I didn't see what year that happened in. But in November of 1986, she actually got fired after 11 years of working for her job. They cited that poor work performance. This was a bad thing, but she did take a refresher course and she was able to get a brand new job. And she started at Richmond General in August of 1987. Later that month, though, she reported that her window was broken and pried open. And then in September of that same year, she reported that somebody had actually cut a hole in her screen window. So now we're in 1988 and it's in February, and Cindy reports that somebody had actually broken her basement door. And then things are quiet for a little bit. And October 26th of 1988, it's midnight, and Cindy hits the alarm that Ozzy has for her. When he gets there, he finds her in her carport, and she is partially nude from the waist down. And again, she has a black stocking tightly or loosely around her neck. Her hands and feet are bound with another stocking, and she has no idea what happened. She says that somebody just grabbed her from behind when she was getting into the car. The next year is 1989, and in April, there was another threatening note and attempt to break into her home. And in May, she tells Ozzy that she's done. She wants to talk. She can't take it anymore, and that she actually wants to set up like some sort of a laser beam in her backyard and shoots intruders because she can't take it anymore. But he also says that she said she was ready to talk. They didn't get a chance to. On May 26th of 1989, she started a 5-day vacation from Richmond General. She starts the day off, she runs some errands, she ends up going to get a birthday gift, she goes grocery shopping, and she goes to the bank. Her friends show up at her house around 10 p.m. that night because they were going to be playing a game or doing something. I can't remember what they said they were going to be doing. And she's not there. And her car is eventually found in a grocery store parking lot where she had been going to the bank and the grocery store that day. A search starts for Cindy, and she's eventually discovered on June 8th of 1989. When they discovered her body, it was near an abandoned house, and it appeared at the time that she had been drugged, strangled, and her feet were bound and tied behind her back.
The question is, how do you tie your hands behind your own back and then kill yourself? Strange suicide, but that's what the police in Richmond, B.C. called the killing. She was a 44-year-old nurse, Cindy James, who reported over 100 terrifying threats and incidents in the years up to her death. But when her body was found, what seemed so obviously a sadistic murder wasn't obvious at all.
Now, when her car was found, they had actually found that there was some blood on the door, and it was later tested and determined that that was actually Cindy's blood. And there was also items from her wallet underneath the car. So at the scene, there was nothing else. They found her body. There was nothing around her. There was no like pill bottles or syringes around her body.
It has all the makings of a murder. Cindy's hands and feet tied behind her back. On her right arm, a needle mark. Her body pumped with morphine.
Now, when they did the autopsy and the toxicology and everything, it turned out that Cindy had actually died from a drug overdose. So now the determination is, how did this happen? It's important to know that the items that were found in her system was actually 3.3 milligrams of fluazepam, which is Valium. And they say that that's equal to about 20 pills. So it is believed she had residue from the pills in her stomach, that she would have had to have taken 20 pills. She also had the equivalent of 1.5 ounces of morphine. It's believed it's liquid because there wasn't pill residue from the morphine in her stomach. This got so far over my head. Not really. Not to give myself credit. Like, I got it, but I don't think I can explain it back well enough. So I encourage you to look into that. Here's what's important to know. There was nothing around her. Nothing. No pill bottles, no syringes, no pill residue, no nothing. There's not residue on her hands. There's not residue on her pockets. Like, there's nothing there. So somehow she took 20 pills and a bunch of morphine, probably liquid, but she's a mile from her car. So, I mean, unless she just started just running with that much in her system, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me that the police's theory is that she parked her car, walked the mile there. It took 4 to 5 minutes to tie herself up, which, by the way, in the court case, they were not able to exactly immolate the knots that were done on Cindy, but they said that it's possible. I literally don't understand it. So that's what doesn't make me feel comfortable with saying that Cindy did this to herself. I know that we've seen crazy theories. I know we've seen crazy cases where people can get themselves into weird positions, and I'm not saying it's not possible. It just doesn't make any sense to me. If you have done further research and really understand, I'd love to know what you guys think, because I'm going to link it all down for you below. Let me give you a little bit more information. Cindy's family believes very strongly that police did not spend enough time investigating her case because they were following the narrative that they already had. They already believed that she was doing this to herself. So why not just keep going with that theory if you can make it fit? On June 2nd, 1988, Cindy actually wrote in her diary, "I feel a strong need for justice, but I have to accept it will never come." It's a sad thing to think. I'm not a naive girl. I know 100% that it is very possible that Cindy suffered some sort of a mental breakdown, and that maybe she thought she was being stalked, maybe she wanted the police's attention, and maybe she did some of these things to get them to pay attention. And maybe she meant to stage another attack and she accidentally killed herself. Or maybe she was so tired that she was like, I'm going to make them see I was telling the truth. And maybe she was or she wasn't. What I don't feel comfortable with is that we're left with this like really odd feeling that like, how did she get that much drugs into her system and make it that far? And how are you just gonna be like, yeah, she did. Yeah, no, it's possible. I don't see how it's possible. But it's happened before. The Stranger Things podcast brought up the story of Ruth Finley. And if you're not familiar with that, she was married to a guy. She ended up getting him to spend all kinds of money searching for this like poet that was out to get her. And then it turned out it was her. That something had happened in her life that just disturbed her so deeply that she just did it. Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. It's possible she made it all up. It's also totally possible that one of these 3 men in her life or someone else was absolutely gang stalking her or gaslighting her. So gaslighting is when you purposely do things to someone to make them think they're crazy. So let's say every morning I just go into my son's room and I take his remote control and I just move it to the other side of the room every morning. But then he's like, did you move my remote? And I'm like, no. You move it all the time. Why do you keep moving your remote? And he'd be like, no, I put it there. You make them question themselves. So that's gaslighting. So that's a possibility with her ex-husband, with the boyfriend. I don't know. One of these people could have been messing with her. There's also something that's called gang stalking. And this one is just, it's really difficult to understand and agree with for most people. There is an episode that was done by Vice that I will put down below if you want to look at it. It's an uncomfortable one for most people. There are people in this world that believe that they are really being like high end targeted by like mass people. Like a group of people will target them. Is it possible? Heck yes, it's possible. Criminals work together. Hello, pedophile rings. Like, would you ever think that these people would get together and share photos on the internet? Yeah, they do. So this is totally possible. If you have people that have like this weird fetish for like messing people's life up, just messing with them and like moving things around their house or just following them randomly, but having different people follow them every day so they always just like feel like they're looking over their shoulder and uncomfortable, that's gang stalking. Whether or not you believe it's happening, I don't know. But could it happen? Absolutely. So back in the 80s, that's an option that people have brought up, that maybe someone in the area just wanted to mess with her, just wanted to mess with someone. So there's a lot of theories, but there were 3 men that were definitely of consideration. At the bottom of my list would be Ozzy Caban, which was the private investigator. He was hired way later, but he was hired at the recommendation of Officer Pat McBride. But again, Officer Pat McBride came in on the 4th call to police. But again, could he have put himself into the position to get in to be called? And then you have her ex-husband, which is Roy Makepeace. This all started 4 months after they separated. The theories are out there. I am so curious. What do you guys think? At the end of the day, I hate that this is her legacy, that her legacy is her being labeled as a liar. If she really did do this, she's not a liar. She's mentally struggling. Something in her life was harming her. Something was hurting her to the point that she would act out in this way. And at the end of the day, she's a victim who needed help in some way. Whether she needed to get more treatment or whether or not she needed the police to listen to her, she wasn't just a liar who just lied about things that happened to her. And I think that's all I have for you guys. I really hope this came together in some sort of an order because it's like late at night. I'm all confused. I'm trying to keep myself. It's just a mess. You guys know how it is. So I thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. I say this at the end of every one of my videos. Hug your babies and hug your loves. Life is literally precious. Enjoy every minute of every day. I love you guys, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.